Hi, everyone, and thanks for coming to the second Postman webinar. If you'll check the Zoom group chat, there is a link to the prerequisites that were covered in the last webinar. And just to go over real quick what we went over in the last webinar, we went through these prerequisites, downloaded the app in your operating system of choice, created an account, and got our Postman API key, which will be used much later in the webinar series. In addition to that, we went over sending requests and the basic interface around sending requests. Today, it might be a bit of a short session, but we're going to cover collections, which are the base unit of how Postman sharing and operations work. So I'd encourage you, if you have any questions, just to jump in and ask them in the group chat, and we'll answer them as we go along. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. So this is, these webinars are, a sort of rehashing of what we went over in the Postman workshop during PostCon. This is a talk originally given by one of our lovely developers, Vivek. And so I'll just be walking you through what we went over there. Collections are, at a base, a way to group and organize your requests. And if you recall from last time, requests are, this way of interacting with APIs, getting, setting, getting, posting, and deleting. Oftentimes, when you design an API, you have a lot of different methods, functions, endpoints that you can call. So it's very helpful to organize those all into a single group of requests. And what Postman calls those is collections. And they are actually the foundation for everything in Postman. In the future, we'll be going over mocks, tests, documentation, collaboration, monitoring, even more sharing, stuff like the dashboard. All of these things tend to operate around collections as the base unit. And most people who use Postman will compile their work into collections for things like sharing, running them all together, testing. So collections really are one of the most important parts of Postman. When we organize collections, we normally sort a single API into a single collection. So that means if you're working with the Imgur API, then every single thing that you might want to do with that all exists in one collection. Whereas if you're working across several different APIs, like a Twitter API and a Google Maps API, and you have all these different things, it can be harder to consume when you throw them all into the same collection, unless you really do need, for a testing purpose, to be interacting with all of them. So if you're sharing an API for documentation purposes, or just to show people how to use it, then it oftentimes makes more sense to sort them into a single collection. In addition to collections, you can create folders which exist below collections. Basically, that allows you to further group requests within a collection. So if you have a certain group of endpoints that you might use to update something, then you might group those all into an update folder. If you have a certain group of requests that might involve deleting something, likewise. In terms of other things, you might sort certain parts of functionality, things like steps in a process into individual folders. You might say account creation, information, purchasing. Those things might also go into their own folders. So, and in addition, you might also allow authorization on a folder level as well. And we're going to talk in just a second about all the different things that you can do on the collection and folder level. So we're going to go ahead and pop into the app real quick, and we're going to show you what a collection actually looks like, and what it looks like in terms of a single API. Oops, sorry. So here we are in the Postman app. Let's head back to my workspace. And you can see I have a few collections of my own right now, but I'm going to go ahead and start a new one. And we're going to call this Zookeeper. So, and as you can see, there's several top menu items in collections. Description is one of the it's basically the first one that pops up, And this not only will allow your users to see what the collection is for when you share it, also in the future when we generate documentation, these descriptions will become part of that documentation as well. So we're going to say that Zookeeper is an API for monitoring animals in zoos globally. You can say we, for some reason, and we went over authorization in the last webinar, but should you need to authorize, like we saw with Twitter, you could assign authorization on the top level. Basically, in the same way that we used OAuth 1.0 to use all these keys, if we were to sort all of Twitter's API into a collection, we could actually just use authorization at the top level, and then we wouldn't have to apply it to every request. So this feature, if you're working with authorization, is obviously very powerful. We'll cover pre-request scripts and tests and variables in a future webinar, but those are also important to know about and recognize that there are many things that you can operate on the collection level. So we're going to create that. Within the Zookeeper, we're going to create a folder. So this folder name is going to be zoos. So this is a set of endpoints used to query different zoos across the planet. As you can see, we also have pre-request scripts and tests and authorization on the folders. So one thing, and we'll look at this in a second, is that requests have the ability to inherit their authorization from a parent. Folders can also do this, or they can have their own authorization. So say, like we talked about earlier, you do have a test flow that basically uses a lot of different APIs. You might need different authorization for each of those. So you could group them each into different folders and give them each different authorization while keeping them under the same umbrella. Awesome. Let's go ahead and create our first request within Zookeeper. We're going to call this get zoos. And what this is going to say is get a list of all zoos globally. We're going to go ahead and put this into the Zookeeper collection in the zoos folder. So now we can see that in the collection view over here, we have all this entire folder structure mapped out. So in the way that we're organizing here, get zoos might, be at, so these aren't actually real websites. So the endpoints we're going to be putting in are, of course, mocks. So So here we see that we're getting, a list of all of our zoos. And where we stopped last time is that this would be, the end of our requests. If we do go in and look, we had, just some simple, very basic requests that are all sort of unrelated. But what if we wanted to group them together and share? What if we're not just getting a list of zoos, but once we get our list of zoos, we actually want to figure out what animals are in a specific zoo? Well, we might first create a new folder and say animals. And say this is getting animals from specific zoos. We'll create this. And we're going to go ahead and add a new request and say get animals. Oh, so it looks like we put it into the wrong folder. Collections actually have a pretty handy file management system that allows you to drag and drop between folders. You can even drop things into other collections if you want, or if you happen to create them in the wrong spot. So Now we have get animals, and let's just grab that zookeeper endpoint. And let's say we have a parameter, which is zoo. We're going to say we're going to get them from the Lisbon Zoo. So this would return us a list of all the animals in the Lisbon Zoo. What if, though, we want to know the specific well-being of a specific animal in a specific zoo? We can finally create another request that allows us to see that. And we're going to go ahead, and as you see, with this navigator, we can choose where we save animals to, or where we save zoos to, or requests, my bad. So here we're going to say get, and then we're going to say animals. Let's say well-being. We can say parameter. We probably still want to say zoo is Lisbon. And then here we'll say the animal is a polar bear. So now we have a distinct flow that we've established within our zookeeper collection. Not only can we go to zoos and get a zoo, so we can look at all of our zoos. We can go and we can see, hey, Lisbon. We can go and we can get our animals and say, these are all the animals in Lisbon Zoo. And we can say, oh, they have a polar bear. I wonder how their polar bear is doing. I'm a polar bear enthusiast. So I can go ahead and call this specific request, and now I can figure out how the polar bear is doing. What if, however, we don't just want to see information? What if, for example, zookeeper is a way to track animals across things? So here we've seen a lot of get requests. Let's go ahead and create a new folder for administration. We're going to go ahead and say so here we're creating the base for how all of this information, these requests that we're creating, these endpoints, would ideally be a way to show someone how to build interactions. You might, if you've created these things on a backend, you might give them to a front-end developer, and they would start to see, oh, these are the different operations I can perform using with the UI that I'm going to build that would allow a zookeeper to go ahead and move a polar bear from the Lisbon Zoo to the, let's say, Madrid Zoo. So here we're going to create our sorry. I didn't mean to move the animal well-being. We're going to create a final request. This is going to just say move animal. Here we go, and then we're going to say this is instead going to be a post request. And so the way that the Zookeeper API is formatted is that they've split things into posts and gets. You might even create a larger folder here if you were to say get, and one that would say post. And then you could actually sort the get requests into your get folder and your post requests into your post folder. Oftentimes, this is not going to be how things are structured, but it's a good example for thinking about whether or not you're retrieving information or changing information. So here we're going to say post, and we're going to say animals, say move. And then let's create some parameters that say, origin, origin, zoo, target zoo, and animal. So we're going to go ahead and move our polar bear from Lisbon to Madrid. And now we see that we have a collection of requests and endpoints that's been sorted, that allows us to not only see all of our zoos globally, see their animals, see how those animals are doing, and then actually, sorry, we made this a post request, and actually start to move those animals around. So, whoops. So this is sort of the basis of requests. Or the basis of collections. We are now adding structure to what before had just been, sort of simple single calls into an API. So with the collection, we really get the idea and the form of what's going on inside of an API, especially this Zookeeper API. So I'm going to take you back to the slides real quick, and we're going to talk about basically another type. Oh, sorry. One second, the slides seem to have shifted around again. Sorry about that. Here we go. So actually, the other thing, we've just talked about the blueprint for an API. The other thing that you could do is an operational collection. So that is similar to what we were talking about earlier with and we're actually just going to go ahead and pop into another workspace to see what that might look like. So here we see a collection that is called Airtable the SurveyMonkey. It is basically a collection of requests that retrieves records and then creates questions in SurveyMonkey. So there are calls to two different APIs, and one of them is getting and one of them is posting. Were we to run this collection, it would allow us to actually do something. Instead of creating the blueprint for an API, we're actually creating a series of functions. So in the future, we'll talk about how we can run collections all together. But that's one of the more powerful features there. And so if we were to, say, want to build some other piece of functionality where we want to get locations from the Google Maps API and tweet them, not only could we assign different authorizations in different folders, we could call different APIs and then run them all together so that we don't have to go through and click send on each and every piece of our flow. This really allows us some powerful functionality and is pretty flexible. So I'll pause for a second just to see if there are any questions. Cool. Okay. Looks like no one's posted anything in the basically in the chat. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to have you build your own collection. So if you have the app open, just go ahead and go into it right now and see if you can click that new button and create the collection yourself. I want you to follow along with me. Once you've finished creating your first collection, you can call it whatever you want. In this example, we're going to keep on going with Zookeeper. Go ahead and pop into the chat and just say you're done. Once I see a few of those, we'll go ahead and roll forward. And if you have any difficulties, please don't be afraid to step into the chat and say something you need help with, and we can go ahead and figure that out. Okay, it looks like people are able to create some collections, so let's move forward. Next, we're going to go ahead and try and create our next piece of the collection. So what I would say is create a request. Say to anything within that Zookeeper domain or whichever domain you chose, and go ahead and save that request either into a folder in your collection that you think that you'd like to organize, or just under the collection itself. If you save it to the wrong collection, feel free to drag and drop it, or post if you have any other issues. I'll just give you a few more seconds here, and then we'll roll on to the next step. Okay, cool. So now you should have a collection and a request under it. This is, your basics of creating a collection. From here, you can start throwing more requests into it, decide whether or not you're going to build something out, create a series of requests that you're going to use to test an API that already exists. Maybe you want to achieve some sort of functionality. That's something you can achieve with a collection as well. So if you have any questions there, please pop them in the chat. Otherwise, we'll wait a few seconds and then we'll talk about collaboration. Awesome. So let's move on. Collections are, like we said earlier, are not just a way to organize things, they're also a way to share them. And that's one of the most powerful things about collections. So you can share collections using sync, and we'll talk about that in just a second. You can export them, and then you can also check on other collections that already exist using the Postman API network. So let's go ahead and look at sync real quick. So as you can see, this little icon up in the corner means that we are currently synced to basically our dashboard. And we're going to go ahead and pull that dashboard up for you. So here we have my workspace that we've been, working in. And we can see that this Zookeeper collection that I've been working on is already here online. It has everything that we've been working on, and it even has these descriptions that we've been putting in next to all of the requests, defining everything. They're organized into our folders, and we're able to see all of the different parameters that have been sorted with them. So it seems like some of my requests didn't actually get saved. Let's go back into my workspace and clean those up. Now let's see what happens in the dashboard. Now all of my parameters that previously weren't there have been updated and are in our collection within our workspace. And you can see how basically the different folders that you created are available in a similar file structure within the workspace. So syncing is one great way to actually share and see these things online. As you can see, we can also, as we talked about last time in the last webinar, you see these code snippets on the side that would allow you to pull them into different languages. We could even have them in Node or Ruby or curl. So this is also another great feature for showing developers how to use your API. The next thing I'd like to talk about is exporting collections. So when we have, basically, there are two different buttons next to collections when we click on them. We can click View in Web, which would take us to that view that we just saw there. Or we can click Share. So sharing in another workspace is something that we will cover on collaboration a little later on. But it allows us to not just see things in our own workspace, but publish them into teams. We can also embed. So this allows us to generate code that we can post online that will allow people to directly download this collection and play with it. And we can generate links. Those links are another thing that allows us to share these collections. So that's another quick way of sharing them. But one of the most common ways in the free version is to export collections. So we export collections as JSON files. We save those, and then we can actually go ahead and import them again. So now we see that this collection that I just received just saved as a simple file can be brought back in. So now this is a really great way to share between people. You can even copy paste the text if you want, which is I would say maybe a little little basic, but it's a good way if you are just looking for a quick way to share this blueprint of an API or just prove that something works to someone. As long as they have the Postman app, they'll be able to pull it in and work with it. And that was the thing we used there was just that import. So you can import from links, raw text, files, pretty much anything. And we also do support importing collections and other API formats. And that's one thing that we will touch on a little bit later in the webinar series. So, and I believe the final thing is the API network. The Postman API network, if you give me a second to pull it up, is a collection of other collections that different companies have posted. So let's take a peek at it real quick. You can look at it online through, on the getpostman.com through the /API network. And we've sorted it by different featured APIs as well as different categories. These are APIs that you can view and pull down directly into your Postman instance. So let's take a look. I know that Imgur has a pretty in-depth API documented on their website, and I'd like to pull it into my app and play with it. As you can see, they have this Run in Postman button we addressed a little bit early on in the webinar, and I can go ahead and grab it. And now we have the Imgur API imported. As you can see, they've sorted it into accounts, comments, albums, galleries, and images, but that's a really helpful way to be able to share and get your API and how to use it out into the world. In the future, I believe we'll have some functionality to allow you to share APIs on the API network yourself. So that is a great piece of functionality, and you can also view it in the app through the new menu, where you just have to click on Create New and then API Network. And in the same way, you can bring things into your environment. See, now we have that Cloud RF API. Awesome. So that's a quick overview of how collections and collaborations function. So in summary, collections are a great way to organize requests. You can use folders for additional control. You can, from a top level, use them to sort authorization. You can use them for a few different ways to achieve functional things like maybe hitting multiple APIs at once or replicating a workflow. You can use them to show people the blueprint of your API if they need help building things. You can, in addition, collaborate and share them. And we did get a question in the app, or in the chat, that asks whether or not two people can collaborate and work on a collection at the same time. So previously in the Pro and Enterprise versions, we have a feature that is called Team Workspaces. And everything that is being worked on here that you see popped up is actually something that someone shared in this workspace. So if I'm going to make a change to this workspace, for example, I could come in here and change the name of this example call, and we'll call it example, wow, double example. And let's go ahead and look at that, look at these workspaces again. You can pop into the team workspace and look at what we were just doing. And here we go, example. So anyone is able to go and change things in the team workspace. And that is a way that multiple people can collaborate on a collection at the same time. We are actually in the process of launching a new feature called free collaboration that will allow you to do this in the free version as well. I don't have specifics on that right now, but that's something that we can probably talk about in the next webinar or in the future when we address collaboration. So if there are not any more questions, I'll give you guys a few seconds to ask. Awesome. So we're going to share a link in the chat that is to the webinar page that just gives you guys some information on the basically what's coming up in the series. Next time we'll be talking about variables, which are another extremely important part of Postman Collections and Postman requests. They'll allow us to save a lot of time with work. And I see another question in the chat asking about where can we get to know more information about the capabilities of free collaboration. That is something that we can definitely get back to you with. And you just look for some communication around that in general Postman feed. So on the blog. So thank you guys very much for attending this webinar, and I'm looking forward to seeing you all next time. Look out for this video on YouTube, and eventually we'll be posting we'll be posting the recordings of this content on the PostCon branch of our website as well. Thank you very much for attending, and have a great day.